Prime Minister's resignation honours should be for the staff behind the scenes, the people who toil night and day to keep a Prime Minister going, the unsung heroes. Recognize them with an OBE or things like that. It should not be a peerages list to compete with other lists of peerages.
I wonder if you are keeping up with who's going into the Lords and who's not. It would normally be an issue for political nerds, but it's become the central issue of a row between Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, after some of Johnson's allies didn't make it onto the final list. The former Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries, is one of them. Let's hear what she had to say on Talk TV last night.
This story is about a girl from Breck Road in Liverpool who worked every day of her life since she was 14 years old, had something offered to her that people from that background don't get offered, removed by two privileged posh boys who went to Winchester and Oxford, and taken away duplicity and cruelly, because they have known for months that it wasn't the case, and yet they let me and they let Boris Johnson continue to believe that was the case. It was upsetting, and it's upsetting for everybody who thinks that one day they could be that person, because do you know what? If you come up against someone like Rishi Sunak and James Forsyth from privileged backgrounds who have it all very easily given to them on a plate, you're in trouble. You won't make it, because they can do whatever they want to stop it.
Now, Nadine Dorries also told Piers Morgan about the moment she decided to resign as an MP.
It was the sheer audacity of the Chief Whip thinking that at my age, after having worked in Parliament for 21 years, serving 18 years on the backbenches, having been a minister during COVID and health, having been a Secretary of State, that he could dangle out to me some kind of stick and carrot, like be a good girl and we'll make sure something's sorted for you in the future, which is basically what he was saying to me. That, for me, at that moment, was what made me change my mind and made me make my decision to resign.
How upset are you at now not getting this honour you assumed you were going to get, not joining the House of Lords, not being Baroness at the end of all this?
Do you know what? I'm broken-hearted, not just for me, but for everybody who comes from a background like mine, who in today's world don't have the ability to climb ladders that they used to have years ago.
That was Nadine Dorries, obviously very upset about not being on the list, or a version of the list. William Hague, Nadine Dorries is part of this. Some people would say she was a casualty of this particular feud. But the feud itself, William Hague, it's unbecoming, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's not a great sight, is it, for a Prime Minister falling out with his successor but one. Of course, we have to remember there was another one in the middle of it all last year. It's not a great sight. It always happens. By the way, I wrote a column sometime last year about how all prime ministers fall out with their successors. And so it's happened quickly in this case. And clearly they have a different view of what happened at this meeting about who was being put forward for the House of Lords. But I think in the end, 3 MPs have gone. Well, the 350 who haven't gone. And I think that they have a sensible view of the Conservative Party between now and the next election, that they need to back Rishi Sunak, that the government's making progress, it can pull it. It's the government itself is now working well compared to when Boris Johnson was there. So I don't think Conservatives should be too downhearted about it, but certainly it is an unseemly business.
Kezia, what do you make of all of it?
I'm absolutely baffled on a number of different levels. First of all, let's talk about the honour system and the peerage system. Are we seriously saying in this modern age that a departing Prime Minister can make a litany of his friends and colleagues lifelong legislators in an unelected chamber, and that's normal? We just accept that, and then we can discuss and quibble about who those people are rather than the system itself. And then separately, just listening to Nadine Dorries there, she's obviously sore, she's obviously angry, but to say that, Rishi Sunak and James Forsyth have betrayed people from her background without recognising perhaps what her party and some of the decisions that she's taken in her life have done to working class people in Liverpool, I think requires a really big, deep draw of breath and a bit of humility before you can start really going there, if that's where you want to go.
William Hague, you're a member of the House of Lords, and there are people, as Kezia has talked about there, who have been unsure and not happy about the way that peerages, etc., are handed out for many years. But it's never really touched many people because it's something weird that happens behind closed doors. The thing about this feud and this story is that it does actually bring this to life with larger-than-life characters like Nadine Dorries, like Stanley Johnson or whoever. And now more people than perhaps before are questioning the system. I think that's fair to say. Do you feel 100% happy with the way that people are given honours? Not just, I suppose specifically we're talking here about outgoing prime ministers.
No, I'm not at all happy. No, I've raised this in my column in this morning's paper, and completely in line with what Kezia was just saying. I think Prime Minister's resignation honours should be for the staff behind the scenes, the people who toil night and day to keep a Prime Minister going, the unsung heroes. Recognise them with an OBE or things like that. It should not be a peerages list to compete with other lists of peerages, and there are other times and procedures for putting people in the House of Lords. And by the way, I went to a comprehensive school in Rotherham, and I'm a Lord. The idea of some barrier erected by posh boys. So, well, the posh boys didn't do very well stopping me getting in there, and I don't think that's how it works at all. In this case, the problem was a former prime minister proposing a whole set of people for the Lords who were in the House of Commons at the time. And that raises a major difficulty. And I imagine that was one of the problems why the House of Lords Appointments Commission didn't put them forward.
Yeah.
But that is something that could easily have been anticipated.
William, you've palled up with Tony Blair again to talk about AI. Before we get on to AI, is that a fruitful partnership for you? Is this what you're going to be doing almost every year now for the next few years, you and Tony getting together, solving the world's problems?
Well, it's on this subject of science and technology. You'll recall we published a report in February about innovation and science powering the future of Britain and what should be done about that. Well, this is unpacking one part of that very important part, which we say is the most difficult policy challenge for governments ever, possibly, which is artificial intelligence. And we're recommending to people in all political parties what should be done. And that's why we've got together on this, because we're saying, actually, the Conservative Party or the Labour Party need to pursue this. Both of them need to pursue this agenda because the country needs a long-term cross-party effort to be at the forefront of science, including AI.
And how worried are you? Because we've talked a lot on this programme about, if you look at the lesson of other technological advancements, look at social media platforms, they happened, they became super powerful, and then we were unable to regulate them because they'd already gone past the point at which they could be controlled even by national governments. Look at that with platforms now. That seems to be the case. Is your concern that we're not investing enough in AI to make it profitable, although we're not investing enough effort in regulating it, because by the time we get round to it, it might already be too late?
Yeah, it's both. There is a crucial window now of opportunity to really get on top of all the issues that you described, because soon we will, by next year, by the middle of next year, we will see new versions of large language models like ChatGPT, which will be, in all likelihood, many, many times more powerful than the things we have seen so far. And so we're advocating with urgency setting up what we have named in our report Sentinel, but the government could call it anything it likes, which is a laboratory, really, of artificial intelligence in this country, public sector and private sector working together, Now, this could very much be part of the initiative that the Prime Minister agreed with President Biden last week. And this would also mean that we've got the skills and resources in this country to be at the successful cutting edge of AI in the private sector as well, bringing potentially untold benefits to unimaginable benefits to health and education and other public services. But it does need us to scale up and speed up. You know, we're advocating a resources 10 times greater on our what's called compute power in this country, and bringing things forward by 3 years that aren't going to happen until 2026. And we know that's difficult for any government or political parties, but this is the scale. This is the most important thing that is happening in the world at the moment, with absolutely far-reaching effects on everybody's lives, and we've got to be at the forefront of it.
Kezia, where are you on this debate? Are you a Luddite who wants to shut your ears, or are you climbing aboard the Blair Hague AI bandwagon here?
Oh, I join that ship any day of the week. But in truth, I think, this is exactly what former leaders should be doing. People of the stature of Tony Blair and William Hague, doing the horizon scanning, identifying issues where perhaps the immediacy of day-to-day demands on today's leaders don't give them the time and space to consider. So I actually think it's a great public service that's been done here to publish a report about the challenges of AI and the potential that it gives to the United Kingdom. I don't understand it though, Stig. I'm not going to pretend that I do, but I'm very glad that these two do, and that they're challenging the government to do something about it in such a constructive way. A warning with an action plan proposed alongside it, I think, is extremely helpful.
We're going to move on to talk about the SNP. Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf says there's no reason to suspend Nicola Sturgeon. Not everyone in his party agrees. We're talking really about Michelle Thompson and Ash Regan. We did speak to Keith Brown, Deputy Leader of the party, this morning, and he said that there's no reason for Nicola Sturgeon to stand back or for the whip to be removed. Kezia, Dugdale, what do you think?
First and foremost, I really feel for Humza Yousaf. I mean, every week he tries to get onto the front foot and something happens that pushes him back against a wall. I think talking about these particular set of circumstances and what's happened over the weekend, you need to recognise, if you know your Scottish politics, that both Michelle Thompson and Ash Regan have particular beef with Nicola Sturgeon. It's no surprise, really, that they are the ones to be calling for her to resign her membership. That said, I also think it's worth pointing out that, the suggestion that if she did leave the SNP or voluntarily rescinded her membership just now, that the story would go away or it would somehow get better for the party is just a complete nonsense as well. Much like the honour story that we've talked about earlier today, these are important stories, but they're a huge distraction from some of the big challenges that both the UK and the Scottish Government should really be concerned with right now.
William Hague, do you have a view on whether or not the party should suspend Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, I think I do. It's not my party, but yes, if I was Humza Yousaf, I would really show that I mean it when he has said that he's got to separate his friendship with Nicola Sturgeon from what he calls a really important job he's got to do as First Minister. I think that's true. But in order to do that, he's got to show that he is as strict about this situation as the SNP has tried to be on previous situations. And they did in these previous cases that you and Kezia were just mentioning, suspend members of the Scottish Parliament. So I would, if I was him, I would do that, because you've no idea how this case is going to turn out one way or another. But it would be wise politically to be inoculated as much as possible in the SNP against that. But that's for the SNP to decide, and none of us know how a legal process will develop.
Really sad and interesting story this morning and yesterday. MPs are calling for an overhaul of a 19th century law that has been used to prosecute a mother of three. Carla Foster has been sentenced to over 2 years in prison for illegally procuring an abortion while 6 months pregnant. Based on this law, she lied to pregnancy advisors about how far along she was in the pregnancy and then took the abortion pills they sent her. The child was stillborn days later at between 32 and 34 weeks of gestation. That baby there could have lived at that stage of gestation. It was during the first COVID lockdown in 2020 that this happened. Kezia, this, as ever with this type of issue, there seems to be very strong polarities at work. But there may be a distinction we need to draw. There's a question of whether this mother should be imprisoned. But the first question is, has this mother committed a serious crime? And maybe we could deal with those two things separately.
So it's an absolutely horrendous story in every definition of that. Look, I think there's clearly a child that's been failed here, but there's also a woman that's been failed too. And I am entirely with Stella Creasy in looking at this and hoping that it could be treated entirely as a health matter. I don't think the woman should be criminalised for this. I think if she were to be criminalised for it, if it was something that happened regularly and there was serious intent here, then we would use a piece of law that didn't date back to 1861 in order to charge her with an offence. I don't see what criminalising her or charging her is going to achieve. She's clearly deeply distressed, had a horrendous experience. And the last thing we need in this process is to use the police and the law as a form of punishment when really everyone's been failed and let down here.
William, would you go that far? Is it a criminal act to end the life of a baby in the womb between 32 and 34 weeks of gestation?
Well, it is a criminal act, of course, as the law standard and the judge pointed out. He was implementing the law.
Should it be a criminal act?
And that it's up, yeah, well, that's the other there. Then, so it's up to Parliament to change the law if it wishes to do so. And whether it's a criminal act that where the offender should be put into prison, I think that is, I wouldn't agree with that. No, I think it's an absolutely tragic case on multiple grounds, but I think for the woman in question to end up in prison is not the right answer here. So if I was in the government, I would be looking to how to change the law.
But would you still make it illegal? I mean, that's the question, that you could make it illegal but not subject to a prison sentence? Or would you go so far as to say this is just a health matter and therefore should not be captured by the criminal process?
Well, you could one way or the other. I mean, clearly, you don't want it's terrible that this woman has gone to prison. It's also terrible what happened. So it could still be illegal, but it is much more a healthcare matter than a criminal matter. I wouldn't like to adjudicate just off the cuff on which of those it should be, but ending up in prison is the wrong place for this to end up, one way or another.
Let's talk finally, if we can, about this rather strange story. The author, Elizabeth Gilbert, behind Eat, Pray, Love, has had to pull back her latest novel, which has received quite the backlash online, lots of one-star reviews, because it is set in Russia. And obviously, Russia are involved in a war right now. In Ukraine. And Elizabeth Gilbert has reacted to that criticism, some people would say bizarrely, by pulling the novel. Kezia, Dugdale, what do you think?
It's a bizarre story, and I really feel for the author, who's clearly spent, an awful lot of her heart and soul writing what is clearly going to be a beautiful book. I guess she's doing it for commercial reasons on the basis that she doesn't think it's now going to sell. But if we're going to start banning books or pulling books off shelves that have any reference to Russia ever in them, then you can kiss goodbye to every John le Carré novel and many other spy stories. It might just leave Stig's on the shelf and that'll be the only one left.
Oh, bless.
A happier Britain, Kezia, could then result.
William Hague, what do you think?
The Stigs won't be on the shelf because they fly off the shelf.
There we go.
Look at that.
Similarly, I can't quite understand what the fuss is about here, because this is not a book, as I understand it, praising Russia. It's just set in Russia in the middle of the last century, so it's nothing to do with the war. But what would I do? I was thinking what I would do if I was this author, and you would end up pulling it. If people are so upset, because you also have to respect Ukrainians who are, they are the people under the biggest pressure in the world. They are giving their lives fighting for their land and freedom. And if a lot of them are outraged about it, well, then it is better to say, okay, well, even if I don't understand why this particular thing offends you, I don't want to offend you. So we'll pull it. So I think she has probably done the right thing. I'm sure it will reemerge in 2 or 3 years.
It's interesting that the power of the 1-star review, because I think that's what was happening. It was on Goodreads. It must have been an advanced copy or something. There were so many 1-star reviews on Goodreads that's obviously what panicked the publishers, because I mean, I don't know how it works, but if something starts off it's from such a low score, it's going to be difficult to bring it up, and then obviously it's not going to be a commercial success. So perhaps they think, well, let's just leave it for the time being, William. Maybe that's what it is.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's that, but I think it's also you do have to have some sensitivity to how people feel in a war, and even if, as I say, it's hard to understand or comprehend that. So I think she's done the right thing. At least we found somebody this morning who's
done the right thing.
And I don't think she has. Yeah, exactly. I think it's outrageous. It's awful. Poor woman. Just because some Ukrainians feel sad about the war, that's one thing. She must be allowed to write a book about Russia.
Okay.
No. No. Fine.
Right. Stig is very exercised about this. William Hague, thank you very much. He's thrown his pen down. Former Conservative leader William Hague and the former Scottish Labour leader Kezia Dugdale.